The road to the country house always brought me a sense of peace. I watched through the car window as the trees blurred past, the silver rays of the sun breaking through the leaves. The house by the lake had become a sort of refuge for our family, a place where we could all escape the noise and demands of life. Here, it was quiet. Time seemed to slow down. It had been a while since I'd been here, but the memories of childhood summers came rushing back. Those long days when Lucas and I swam in the lake, climbed trees, and laughed without a care for tomorrow felt so distant, as if they belonged to another life. When I arrived, Lucas was the one who greeted me. It caught me off guard. My memories of him were different, a cheerful, carefree boy. But now, standing before me was a grown man, his face more serious, his eyes deep like the lake behind the house. There was something about him I couldn't quite place, but I felt it. Our parents weren't arriving for a few days, so it was just the two of us. And though we were step-siblings, I immediately knew this meeting would not be like the others. We spent the day as usual, doing mundane things, tidying up the house, walking along the lake shore. I noticed Lucas was speaking less than he used to. His words were brief, as though he was holding something back. I tried to fill the silences with stories of my city life, my upcoming wedding to Andrew. But each time I mentioned Andrew, Lucas would only nod, not engaging in the conversation. The silence between us weighed heavily on me. I couldn't quite put my finger on what had changed, but I sensed that our interaction was no longer as easy as it had once been. There was something new, something unfamiliar, like a thin, invisible wall that I couldn't seem to break through. The next morning, I decided to sort through some things in the house. Among the old boxes in the storage room, I found some of our childhood toys, items that had once been part of our world full of adventures and imagination. I sat down on the floor and started sifting through them. I came across my old drawing notebook. As I flipped through the pages, I saw the innocent sketches of our childhood, the house by the lake, Lucas and me on the swings, the sun, smiles. These simple and carefree images brought a warm wave of nostalgia over me. I found myself smiling at these little glimpses of our past. Just then, my phone rang. It was Andrew. I smiled at the sight of his name on the screen and answered. We talked about his work, the upcoming wedding, how much I missed him. But somehow all of it felt distant, far removed from the reality of this house and the memories surrounding me. Lucas entered the room while I was still on the call. He glanced at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that made me uneasy. His gaze was darker than usual, and for a moment, I thought I caught a flash of jealousy. It was so unexpected. I quickly looked away, trying to focus on my conversation with Andrew, but now my attention was scattered. A thought buzzed in my mind. What was that? When I hung up, the unease lingered. Lucas remained silent, but his presence felt different now. It was as if he wanted to say something but was holding back. I couldn't figure out what was going on. His silence weighed heavier than any words. I tried to return to what I had been doing, but every glance from him made me wonder. I was beginning to suspect that something had changed in how he felt about me. But what exactly? And why? The next day started as usual. I thought it would be good to focus on practical things and shake off the strange thoughts lingering in my mind. Lucas and I continued with the chores, but something about his behavior felt different. He was quiet, and every reply seemed cautious, as if he were holding something back. I couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. Do you remember how we used to play here? I broke the silence while dusting off old books on the shelf. Every summer, we spent nearly all our time here. He nodded, still focused on his task. Yeah, I remember, he replied, his voice calm, but I noticed the subtle tension in him. You always came up with crazy things just to make me laugh. I smiled, hoping to lighten the mood with a memory. Lucas finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. I'm not that kid anymore, Em. There was something in his tone that made me pause. It wasn't just a casual remark. It was a statement, a reminder that those days were long gone. It felt too serious for a simple joke. Yeah, you've changed, I admitted, sensing the growing tension between us. Sometimes I feel like I don't really know you anymore. He gave me a long look, one that made me feel uneasy. Maybe you never really knew me. His words stung. Suddenly, I realized there was more behind his gaze than just memories of the past, something he was carefully hiding. But instead of diving into that, I averted my eyes and continued dusting the shelves. After lunch, we decided to take a walk by the lake. It used to be our favorite place. We could sit by the shore for hours, throwing stones into the water, talking about everything and nothing. I hoped the walk would bring back some of that lightness I was desperately trying to find. But Lucas walked in silence, only occasionally nodding to my comments. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "You were always so talkative. What changed?" I asked, glancing at his profile. He slowed his pace, sighing as he stared out over the water. "I don't know, Em. Everything just feels different." "Why different?" I pressed, needing to understand. "Because we're different. Everything's changed." His voice was quiet but resolute. He finally turned to me, his eyes meeting mine, and in that gaze there was something new, something unfamiliar. It was like he was trying to say something but couldn't find the words. I looked down, feeling the strange tension between us growing stronger. Maybe he was right. Maybe we had changed, and I couldn't stop wondering what those changes really meant, for him and for me. In the evening, Lucas and I decided to watch a movie. It was a simple, almost innocent thing we used to do whenever we were alone together. We picked an old film we both knew by heart, but this time, something felt different. I found myself paying more attention to how close we were sitting, too close for people who were once only connected by childhood memories. I could feel his warmth beside me, and it threw me off. Every time he shifted slightly, I became hyper-aware of his movements, as if my body was reacting to his presence without my permission. The movie was nearing its end, but I could barely remember anything from the plot. My mind was elsewhere. When the film finally finished, Lucas reached out to turn off the TV. The room plunged into darkness, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the wind outside. "It's getting cold," Lucas remarked, rubbing his hands together. I felt a faint chill coming from the windows. "Maybe we should stay in the same room?" I suggested, surprising even myself, trying to sound casual. "So we won't feel so alone." He glanced at me and I caught the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Sure." We headed to the bedroom. I got into bed first, trying to act as naturally as possible, though everything inside me felt tense. Lucas followed, lying down beside me, and although the bed was big enough, he ended up closer than I expected. At first, we just lay there in silence, but I could feel his presence so acutely that it was as if the space between us didn't exist. Suddenly, he reached out and wrapped his arm around my waist. The gesture was so soft and natural that I didn't realize what was happening at first. But after a few moments, I felt his arm tighten around me, pulling me closer than necessary. His touch no longer felt accidental or innocent. I held my breath, but I didn't move, unable to pull away from this new, strange closeness. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but I couldn't sleep. I could hear his breathing, heavy, slow, as though he was trying to control himself. And with every passing second, it became clearer to me that he wasn't sleeping either. My thoughts were racing. What did this mean? Why wasn't I pulling away? Why did I enjoy being in his arms? When morning finally came, I felt Lucas shift slightly and remove his arm. He looked like he had just woken up, and the first thing he said was, "I haven't slept that well in a long time." I looked at him, feeling a strange mix of emotions. "Me too," I lied. In truth, I hadn't slept at all. But it wasn't because I was uncomfortable. It was because I liked being in his arms, and I couldn't understand why that left me feeling so confused. The next morning, I woke up with a weight on my chest. The events of the previous night still lingered in my mind. I tried to convince myself that it had been just a casual touch, that it meant nothing. But I couldn't shake the strange feeling that our closeness had left behind. It was more than just a hug. It was a turning point, a moment when I began to realize that something bigger was happening between Lucas and me, something I wasn't ready to admit. Later, as I busied myself with chores, my phone rang again. Andrew's name flashed on the screen. My heart sped up as though I had been caught in a moment where I had something to hide. I forced myself to smile and answered. "Hey, Andrew," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. He immediately sensed something was off. "You sound distant today. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. His caring tone made me feel a pang of guilt. "Everything's fine, just a little tired," I replied, avoiding anything too revealing. I was speaking to him, but my thoughts were far away. I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas's arms around me, his heavy breathing beside me last night, and it sent a wave of confusion through me. Lucas entered the room just then. Our eyes met, and I felt the invisible string between us pull tight again. His gaze was dark, intense. I couldn't help but notice the flash of jealousy in his eyes. It was so unmistakable that I instinctively withdrew from my conversation with Andrew. "Sorry, I'm busy right now," I quickly said into the phone, ending the call sooner than I had intended. As I put the phone down, I felt the tension between Lucas and me becoming almost unbearable. He watched me in silence, and I felt a flush of heat rise to my face. My emotions were becoming tangled, more complicated with each passing day. I couldn't deny them any longer. I had tried to distract myself with housework, with mundane tasks. But every time I saw Lucas, my thoughts inevitably returned to him. We were locked in a silent conflict where words weren't necessary. I knew I couldn't go on like this, but something was holding me back from changing anything. The fear of destroying my stable, familiar life was intertwined with this new feeling I couldn't fully understand. But I knew one thing. The inner conflict was growing stronger with each passing day. The days began to blend into one indistinguishable flow, and I suddenly realized that I had grown accustomed to Lucas's presence. What once felt unsettling, his silence, his footsteps, his gaze, now seemed natural. We had settled into a routine, but there was an unspoken tension between us, something neither of us was willing to address. That morning, our parents called to say they'd be delayed for a few more days. I wasn't surprised, really. Every time they called, I found myself less eager for their return than I should have been. Instead, the thought of Lucas and me staying alone for a few more days filled me with a strange mix of apprehension and unexpected relief. Something inside me was shifting. I tried not to notice the changes, convincing myself that it was simply the effect of us being alone together for so long. But that was a lie. I began to catch myself enjoying Lucas's presence. His closeness no longer made me uncomfortable. If anything, I found comfort in it, and that frightened me. Every time our eyes met, I remembered that night. We avoided talking about it as if by mutual agreement, but the silence only made the tension grow. Lucas had become more reserved, his behavior more conflicted. Sometimes he seemed as calm as he used to be, and other times I caught his gaze lingering on me, filled with something undefined and almost unsettling. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the silence in the room was deafening. I couldn't stand it anymore and decided to break it, desperate to fill the void. "How are you, Lucas?" I asked, knowing full well how simple and out of place the question was, considering everything that was happening between us. He looked up from his plate, his eyes meeting mine as if the innocent question had touched something deeper. His gaze darkened for a moment, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. "Fine," he answered shortly, but his voice was tense. I nodded, trying to return to my meal, but the turmoil inside me wouldn't subside. With each passing day, my feelings for Lucas were becoming harder to deny, and I could no longer hide them from myself. Everything between us seemed to be building towards something inevitable, and I had no control over it. Later, as I cleared the table. I felt him standing behind me. He was too close enough that I could feel his warmth, but I didn't dare turn around. My heart raced when he gently placed his hand on my shoulder. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper. I held my breath, waiting for him to continue, but he didn't. His hand lingered on my shoulder a little longer than it should have before he pulled away. I didn't know what troubled me more, his touch or the fact that he hadn't said anything. These moments had become part of our daily interactions, casual touches, glances that lasted too long, silent pauses filled with tension. We never spoke about that night, but it was always there, in everything we did. I tried to convince myself that it would pass, that it was just the strain of being alone together for so long. But my feelings for Lucas had become too obvious to ignore. The more I tried to escape them, the stronger they became. The tension in the house was palpable, like electricity in the air before a storm. Each passing day had become more charged with silent glances and unspoken words. I knew that sooner or later this tension would break. But instead of waiting for it to turn into something we couldn't control, I decided to try and diffuse it. Maybe if we could just spend an evening together like we used to, calmly, without the awkward silences, things would go back to normal. So I suggested we have a proper dinner. Not something quick and routine, but a real dinner, something special. We agreed to cook together, like we used to when we were younger, when simple moments brought joy. It seemed like a good idea, a way to distract ourselves and just be together without overthinking things. Lucas agreed with a slight smile, and for the first time in days I felt a sense of relief. We chopped vegetables, prepared pasta, joked and laughed. The atmosphere felt surprisingly peaceful, almost serene, as if all the tension of the past few days had melted away. His laughter sounded light, like it used to, and it made me relax a little. We talked about life outside this house, his work, my future plans. Yet despite the apparent ease of it all, I could feel something much stronger simmering beneath the surface. Every accidental touch when our hands brushed in the kitchen, every moment our eyes met, seemed to fill the air with a passion we were both trying to hide. When dinner was ready, we sat down at the table. I lit candles to create a cozy atmosphere, but the gesture felt far more symbolic than I had intended. The flickering candlelight cast soft shadows across his face, and I found myself unable to look away. We talked, we laughed, but everything felt different, as if the entire evening wasn't about the words, but about what we could no longer deny. After dinner, we found ourselves in the same bed once again. It had become almost routine, sleeping next to each other, as if it were the most natural thing. But tonight, something was different. As soon as we lay down, the silence filled the room and I could feel my heart beating faster. Lucas turned toward me, and his eyes met mine. There was something new in his gaze, something I understood immediately but was afraid to acknowledge. He barely whispered my name, his voice soft yet filled with emotion. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. We just stared at each other, and the silence was heavy with anticipation. I could feel the space between us shrinking, his breath closer to mine. At some point our lips met. It was a hesitant kiss, as if we were both afraid to cross the line we had been avoiding for so long. But this kiss was no longer a sibling's kiss. It was filled with all the emotions we had been trying to hide. In that moment, everything became clear. We could no longer deny what was happening between us. That kiss changed everything. After that evening, I could no longer deny that my relationship with Lucas had changed forever. Every moment spent with him only solidified this realization. We were no longer just step-siblings. That kiss had shattered the boundary I had been trying to maintain, and now our feelings could no longer remain hidden. I often found myself thinking about Lucas, even when I tried to focus on something else. Every time I pictured my future with Andrew, Lucas's face would appear in my mind. Guilt gnawed at me for what I was doing to Andrew. He deserved better, honesty, loyalty, but the more I tried to remind myself of this, the stronger my pull toward Lucas grew. It was as if my whole life had been built around rules that now seemed meaningless. Lucas, for his part, wasn't hiding his feelings anymore either. He became even more attentive, even more tender. Every movement, every glance from him was filled with desire. His touches lingered longer. His words were warmer. I could feel the passion between us growing with every interaction, and there was nowhere for me to escape from it. One evening, when we were alone again, I couldn't hide what was happening inside me any longer. I sat across from him on the couch, my legs tucked beneath me, studying every detail of his face. "Lucas, this is wrong," I began, though I wasn't even sure I believed the words myself. "We've crossed the line." He looked at me, his gaze calm but firm. We both feel it. This is more than just a mistake." I froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. He was right. This was more than just a moment of weakness or a passion we could suppress. My feelings for Lucas were real, no matter how much I had tried to deny them. But, Andrew, I sighed, the weight of guilt pressing down on me as I thought of my fiancé. It felt like a heavy burden. "I know," Lucas said softly. "But you have to be honest with yourself. You already feel differently." He wasn't pressuring me, wasn't trying to force me to make a choice. His words simply voiced what I already knew deep down but had been too afraid to admit. I felt that my life would never be the same again. Everything that had once been familiar and certain, my engagement to Andrew, my plans for the future, now felt distant and foreign. My feelings for Lucas had changed everything. We spent another evening together, and I could feel the world around me slowly yet inevitably shifting. I could no longer ignore the obvious. I no longer wanted to fight what I felt. This wasn't something fleeting or accidental. It was real, and it had completely altered my life. I had always prided myself on my self-control, my ability to keep my emotions in check, especially when things got complicated. But now, with each passing day, it felt like I was losing that control. Every time I was near Lucas, my heart would race, and my mind would scream at me to stop. It was a constant battle between what I knew and what I felt. I tried to distance myself. Every time his presence felt too close, I would find an excuse to leave, step outside for air, or busy myself with something. But no matter how hard I tried to create space between us, it didn't work. I could feel the ties between us, like invisible threads growing stronger. And it unsettled me deeply. Lucas, on the other hand, wasn't hiding his feelings anymore. His gaze was direct, almost challenging, as if he wanted me to see that he wasn't going to play these games anymore. Every time he came close, when his hand would brush against mine, I felt something inside me tremble. He was here, he was real, and his feelings for us couldn't be denied. But with each moment, the fear grew too. We both knew we were standing on the edge of something that could completely destroy our lives. My future with Andrew, my family, everything was at risk. But stepping away seemed just as impossible. I couldn't just forget everything that had happened between us. It wasn't just passion. It was something deeper, something that had already rooted itself inside me. One night, I lay in bed trying to sleep. My head was full of thoughts. I tried to imagine what the future would look like if I returned to Andrew, continued our engagement, and pretended nothing had happened. But every time Lucas's face appeared before me, his touch, his gaze, his voice, they had become a part of me, and I could no longer ignore that. At that moment, the door quietly opened, and Lucas stepped into the room. I couldn't find the strength to tell him to leave. His presence filled the air with something stronger than the fear of consequences. He came closer to the bed, and I felt him sit down next to me. I was too exhausted to resist. His voice was quiet, but there was so much emotion in it. He waited for me to speak, but I stayed silent. We just sat there in the stillness, feeling the passion and doubt swirl around us. "I can't do this anymore," I finally whispered, and it was the truth. This inner battle was draining me. I couldn't pretend that I could control everything anymore. "Neither can I," he replied, and his hand touched mine. The touch was soft, but there was so much sincerity in it that I couldn't fight myself any longer. I turned toward him and our lips met again. But this kiss was different. There was no hesitation in it. It was the kiss of two people who knew they had already crossed the line and that there was no going back. There was something more between us now than just passion. It was a feeling I could no longer ignore. But along with it came fear. Fear that our connection would destroy everything I had known and everything I had been up until this moment. Night had fallen over the house, and silence filled the rooms. But inside me, a storm was raging. Lucas and I sat on the couch, as if everything was normal, but every minute felt like a countdown to something inevitable. With every glance, every touch, the air between us grew thicker, as if even the house knew that tonight something would change forever. We no longer tried to keep our distance. Our hands found each other, and there was no point in retreating. All the internal struggle that had torn me apart for so long now seemed pointless. When Lucas touched my face, I felt the last remnants of doubt fade away. The passion we had kept hidden for so long erupted, consuming us both. Our kisses became more desperate, our bodies moving closer as if every cell demanded this closeness. Everything unfolded in a haze where reality blurred and faded. I wasn't thinking about the future or the consequences, only about how much I wanted him at that moment. We moved to the bedroom, our movements urgent, as if we were afraid that if we stopped, it would all disappear. Lucas held me tightly, as if we both knew this night was a point of no return. I couldn't hold back anymore. My body responded to his every touch, and I forgot about everything else. In the height of our passion, I heard my phone vibrate on the nightstand. In a moment of weakness, I reached for it, intending only to move it out of the way so we wouldn't be disturbed. But my hands were shaking, and as I grabbed it, I accidentally answered the video call. Andrew's face appeared on the screen. Time seemed to freeze. My mind was a blur, and it took a few seconds for me to realize what he was seeing. I was on all fours on the bed, my hair disheveled, breathing heavily with Lucas behind me. Those few seconds were all Andrew needed to understand. His eyes widened in shock and pain, which I couldn't miss even through the distance. In a panic, I ended the call, my heart racing wildly. Everything inside me screamed that it was over. Not just with Andrew. Everything I had known had collapsed in that moment. I sat on the bed, unable to move, and Lucas was silent, likely realizing what had just happened as well. In one instant, our entire world had crumbled, and there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up with a hollow feeling inside me. Everything that had happened the previous night felt like some twisted nightmare I couldn't escape from. But this was reality, a reality I had created for myself. I picked up my phone from the nightstand, secretly hoping that Andrew's call had been just a figment of my imagination. But the message waiting for me on the screen shattered any such hope. "It's over between us." The words, so simple, felt like a punch to the gut. There was no long explanation, no anger, just cold, undeniable truth. Everything I had known and built over the past years had crumbled in a matter of seconds. I stared at the screen as if by some miracle the words would change if I looked long enough. But they didn't. Andrew was serious. He had erased me from his life with the same ease that I had answered that fateful call. I tried calling him, but the call wouldn't go through. He had blocked me. My chest tightened with the realization that this was truly the end. I wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize, but it was useless. He didn't want to hear me anymore. He didn't care what had happened or why. To him, everything was clear. Lucas walked into the room, his face full of concern. I knew he felt guilty. It was written all over him, in the way he looked at me, in the way he moved. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, though he probably knew the answer. "No." My voice shook. "I've ruined everything. Andrew, he doesn't want to see me anymore." Lucas sat at the edge of the bed, his face filled with sympathy. "I understand if you're angry at me, but I can't deny what I feel. I know that's not an excuse, but I feel it too," I interrupted, surprising myself. Deep down, I knew I couldn't place all the blame on him. Yes, Lucas was part of it, but I had made my own choices. I had allowed this to happen. My heart raced at the thought of him, but it was all overshadowed by the realization that my life was now in ruins. I tried to regain some sense of control over myself, over the situation, but everything felt so tangled. I had lost Andrew, the man who had been a part of my future. All our plans, all our dreams had now been scattered to the wind. My life would never be the same again. I could no longer pretend that things could be fixed. There was no forgiveness. There was no going back. Andrew didn't call again, and I knew I would never hear from him. He had erased me from his life like someone deletes a contact from their phone. And that was the most painful realization. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had betrayed everything I once believed in. My life was in ruins, and now there was only one thing left to do: accept it and move forward. But to where? The days stretched out like an endless series of quiet, heavy thoughts. I spent them deep in reflection, still trying to comprehend how drastically my life had changed. Everything that had once seemed so clear and stable was now in ruins. Guilt gnawed at me, like a constant weight on my soul. I often asked myself, what if I had made a different choice? But now it no longer mattered. What happened, happened, and there was no going back. Lucas was there, but I could tell he was burdened by his own guilt. Sometimes he stayed silent, as if afraid to say something that might make my turmoil worse. But his silence wasn't cold. It was filled with understanding. He supported me as best he could, and his presence helped me navigate the chaos inside. I knew my feelings for Lucas were real. There was no doubt about that. At first, I had tried to fight them, blaming myself for allowing them to grow. But now I understood. It had all been inevitable. Our connection wasn't something random or fleeting. It was deep and genuine. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I could no longer ignore it. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the country house, enveloped in silence, Lucas spoke first. "Do you think about what happens next?" His voice was soft, but I could hear the same worry that was inside me. I sighed, searching for an answer. "Yeah, I think about it all the time, but I don't know what next looks like." Lucas leaned closer, his eyes filled with emotion. "We've destroyed our old lives, that's true. But something tells me we can't go back. And maybe that's not such a bad thing." I looked at him, considering his words. He was right. Our lives had changed, and there was no going back to the past. But perhaps there was a reason for that change. We both knew that our feelings for each other couldn't be ignored or suppressed. It was something we had to face, and now that we had accepted it, our path forward was the only one we could take. "I'm scared," I admitted, feeling my words hang in the air. "I'm scared that the future will be even harder." "I'm scared too," Lucas confessed. "But I'm ready to move forward with you, no matter how hard it gets." We sat there, side by side, realizing that this moment was the beginning of something new. Yes, our old lives had been shattered, but ahead of us was a new road, and we understood that we had to embrace it. The path ahead might be difficult, but in this new world we had created together, there was something real, something strong. These days of quiet reflection had given me time to realize that I no longer wanted to look back. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could accept it as part of my new reality. Together, Lucas and I began to talk about the future, what it might look like if we embrace this new path. My parents arrived early in the evening, their footsteps and voices echoing through the halls. Until that moment, the house had felt like a closed-off world where Lucas and I could hide from reality. But with their return, everything shifted. The air grew heavy, as if the house itself could sense the tension between us. I knew they would notice something. We couldn't hide what had happened between us anymore. No matter how hard I tried to act normal, I could feel that my face betrayed everything: worry, sadness, and the inner turmoil that was tearing me apart. It was my mother who noticed first. As soon as we sat down for dinner, her eyes were fixed on me, as though she was searching for answers in my expression. I felt like I was being exposed, and the pressure only grew heavier. Lucas, too, was noticeably tense, though he tried to act as natural as possible. His silence was as loud as my suppressed emotions. "Is everything all right?" my mom finally asked, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. "Yes, everything's fine," I replied, barely holding back the tremble in my voice. It was an obvious lie, and everyone in the room knew it. I felt my eyes welling up with tears and quickly lowered my head to hide them. After dinner, my mother stopped me in the hallway. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her face filled with worry. "Emily, sweetheart, I can tell something's wrong," she said softly. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I froze, unsure of how to begin this conversation. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. "Mom," I started, struggling to find the words. "Andrew, he left me." Her face changed immediately, concern filling her eyes. "What happened? Why?" I stood there, stunned. Her question hit me like a knife, and I realized I couldn't answer. How could I explain that I had destroyed everything I loved? That it had all happened because I couldn't control my feelings for Lucas, my stepbrother? This was a truth I couldn't speak out loud. "I don't know," I whispered, and my eyes filled with tears. I couldn't hold it in any longer. My chest heaved with suppressed sobs, and the tears spilled down my cheeks. I covered my face with my hands, trying to hide from her gaze, from the unbearable truth. My mother pulled me into her arms, her touch warm and understanding, but it only made my pain worse. I felt even more lost. My life was in ruins, and I didn't know how to put myself back together. Lucas stayed back, understanding that this moment was between me and my mom. I knew he felt guilty too, that he didn't want to be the cause of my pain. but something inside me told me that we were already beyond stopping. This break was just part of a larger process, the destruction of my old life and the beginning of a new one, filled with uncertainty and fear. After everything that had happened, it felt like my life had come to a halt. First, there was the pain, then the overwhelming emptiness, as if there was nothing left inside me. It seemed like the world around me had frozen, and I couldn't find a way to move forward. Staying alone in that house had become unbearable. Every corner, every sound reminded me of what had happened, what I had lost, and what I had destroyed with my own hands. It was my mom who first suggested that I come back home to stay with them. "We'll be here for you, Emily. You don't have to go through this alone," she said. There was so much warmth in her words, and although part of me felt like I didn't deserve that kind of support, I couldn't resist anymore. I agreed. I needed to go back to a place where I could feel at least a little bit safe. Living with my parents wasn't what I expected. At first, it was hard. I felt broken and lost, like I had nowhere else to go. I would wake up each morning with a heavy heart, and even the simplest things, like having breakfast with my mom and dad, seemed overwhelming. They looked at me with concern, but they didn't push. They understood that I needed time, and their patient support became the thing that helped me get through the worst moments. Each day, I started to slowly come back to life. My mom would make time for me, offering to talk or do something simple together to take my mind off things. My dad was quieter, but his presence and silent support were always there. He didn't ask too many questions. He was just there, and that was enough. I couldn't help but think about Lucas. Those thoughts came every night when I was alone in bed. I knew our feelings were real, but at the same time I realized that they had destroyed everything that had once been important to me. The pain and regret over what had happened with Andrew still stayed with me like a dark shadow. But now, being under my parents' care, I was slowly beginning to find a way to move forward. Gradually, I realized that I couldn't keep blaming myself for everything. I had made mistakes, yes, but life continued. I had to accept that my future would no longer be what I had once imagined. Something inside me had changed. I was no longer the Emily who dreamed of a simple and predictable life. Now I knew that life was full of complexities, that love and pain could intertwine in ways that made it hard to tell one from the other. My parents became my anchor, helping me cope with the depression that had weighed me down more and more each day. Their support gave me the strength to start looking for myself again. I began to think about what I would do next, what steps I would take to rebuild my life. It might take me a long time to fully heal. But now, surrounded by those who loved me, I felt like I could do it. My new life wasn't the one I had expected, but it was real, and I was ready to embrace it step by step.